The morning of my granddaughter's 6th birthday, I was standing in my daughter-in-law's kitchen in Oakville, watching my son Nathan open a bottle of Prosecco to celebrate, when my phone buzzed with a text from my other son. Callum, don't come today, Shea has a cold, maybe next weekend. I read it twice. Then I looked at the cake I had driven 40 minutes to deliver. A chocolate hazelnut cake from the bakery on Lakeshore that Shea had specifically requested when I asked her what she wanted for her birthday. I had ordered it 3 weeks in advance. It cost me $87. Shea didn't have a cold. I found that out 4 days later from a mutual friend, who mentioned casually that Callum's in-laws had thrown Shea a birthday party that same afternoon. A big one. At a rented space in Burlington. Balloons, a face painter, the works. I wasn't invited. I hadn't been invited in over 2 years to anything that mattered. And that day, standing in Nathan's kitchen with my coat still on, and a cake box in my hands, something in me that had been very patiently waiting for a very long time finally stopped waiting. My name is Donna Mercer. I am 53 years old. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, in the house where I raised 2 boys, mostly on my own, after my marriage ended. I worked for 22 years as a legal assistant at a mid-sized firm downtown. The kind of job where you know more than most of the lawyers but get paid a fraction of what they do. And you learn to be quietly indispensable. I was good at the quiet part. I was very, very good at the indispensable part. That skill did not serve me well in my family. Let me go back. Callum is my older son. He's 31 now, an electrician, good with his hands, quick to laugh. When he was little he used to drag me outside to look at every beetle and worm he found in the garden, convinced each one was a scientific discovery. He was curious and warm, and the kind of kid who made strangers smile at him in grocery stores. He met Renata 8 years ago. She's from a large Croatian-Canadian family in Mississauga, and from the first time I met her I could tell that her family operated by a set of invisible rules I didn't know, and wasn't going to be taught. There were the Horvats. Her parents, her 2 sisters, her uncle and aunt and their 6 combined children. And then there was everyone else. I was everyone else. I told myself it was an adjustment. Blended families take time. I showed up with food. I offered to babysit. I learned how to spell Renata's mother's name correctly. Jelka. And I made sure I spelled it correctly every single time on every card and every text message, because I knew it mattered even if nobody ever acknowledged it. I drove to Mississauga for every family gathering I was invited to, which grew fewer as the years went on. And I drove back alone to Hamilton, feeling like I'd been permitted to visit a country that didn't want to grant me citizenship. Then Shea was born. I will not spend long on this part because I don't want to use my granddaughter as a prop in a story about my own pain. What I will say is that I love that child in the way that reorders your entire understanding of what love is. She looks like Callum did at that age. She has his same laugh. She calls me Nana Donna. And she used to fall asleep on my shoulder at Christmas watching the Nutcracker on TV. And those are some of the best hours of my life. What I will also say is that from the moment Shea arrived, the Horvats treated her like their exclusive property, and they treated me like a courtesy visitor they had to occasionally tolerate. I don't say that bitterly. I say it factually, the way I learned to document things in my years as a legal assistant. Shea's first birthday, the Horvats threw a party. I was told the time wrong, an honest mistake, Callum said, and arrived 40 minutes after it had started, missing the cake and the photos. Shea's second birthday, a family trip to Collingwood, Horvat family only. I sent GIF. It was acknowledged with a 1-word text. Thanks. Third birthday, I was invited this time, but seated at a separate table from the immediate family, next to Renata's elderly great-uncle who spoke very little English. Fourth birthday. I planned ahead and asked Callum in February if I could host a small party at my house, just Shea and a few cousins. He said that sounded great. In April he told me they were doing something else. Fifth birthday, I baked her favorite lemon cake and brought it to their house. Renata accepted it at the door, thanked me, and I never came inside. I sat in my car in their driveway for about 5 minutes before I made myself drive away. And then the 6th birthday. The cake from the Lakeshore bakery. The text that said don't come. Here is what Callum did not know. He did not know that I had been keeping a record. Not a record out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I kept it the way I kept records at work. Because documentation is what separates a feeling from a fact. And because somewhere in the back of my careful, practical brain, I understood that one day I was going to need facts. Over 6 years I had given Shea birthday and Christmas gifts totaling nearly $4,000. Cards, always with a check, always cashed. Handmade items, I knit. I'm good at it. I made her a blanket when she was born that took me 40 hours over 6 weeks. I made her a cardigan at 3, a sweater set at 5. I never counted the hours on those because they were made with love, not obligation, and I didn't want to turn love into arithmetic. But I counted everything else. I had also, over those same years, helped Callum in ways that had nothing to do with Shea. In 2019, when he and Renata were buying their house in Burlington, they couldn't qualify for the mortgage they wanted without a guarantor. They asked me. I said yes. I signed documents that made me legally responsible for their mortgage payments if they defaulted. This is not a small thing in Ontario real estate. My own home equity was on the line. I didn't mention this to people because I didn't want Callum to feel embarrassed about it. I just signed and helped them move. In 2021, Callum had a dispute with a contractor who had done shoddy electrical work on a job and then filed a lien against the property. Callum didn't want to pay a lawyer. He called me. I spent 11 evenings over 3 weeks helping him understand the lien process in Ontario, drafting his response letter, reviewing the Builders Lien Act provisions, organizing his documentation. His case was resolved in his favor. He sent me a text that said, "You're amazing, Mom, thanks." That was the entirety of his acknowledgement. In 2022, Renata's immigration paperwork needed organizing. She was updating her permanent residency documents before applying for citizenship. Callum asked if I could help. I spent 2 full weekends on it. Every document was filed correctly, on time, without a single request for revision. Renata's citizenship came through in 2023. I found out from Callum's Facebook post. None of this was asked with anything but love. That was never the problem. The problem was what happened to that love once it was given. The night after the 6th birthday text, after I'd eaten a slice of the $87 chocolate hazelnut cake alone at my kitchen table. Because I couldn't return it and I wasn't going to waste it. I sat down with a notepad and started writing. I am not a dramatic person. My ex-husband, Thomas, Callum's and Nathan's father, used to say I was the most even-keeled person he'd ever met, which he meant as a compliment and which was also probably why he didn't worry about leaving, because he assumed I'd manage fine. He was right that I'd manage. He was wrong about the rest. I wrote down every gift, every date, every trip to Burlington and Mississauga, every time I had rearranged my schedule, taken a vacation day, declined a plan with a friend because Callum needed something. Then I wrote down the mortgage guarantee, the lien dispute, the immigration documents. For the first 2 items I didn't assign a dollar figure. Those were about love and I still believe that. But I thought about what I would have paid a paralegal in Hamilton to do what I had done for 11 evenings in 2021. Paralegal rates in Ontario run between $75 and $120 an hour. I used $90, conservative, mid-range, 11 evenings, roughly 3 hours each. That was $2,900 just for the lien dispute. The immigration file was similar work. Document organization, deadline management, correspondence review. 2 full weekends, 8 hours each. Another $1,400. I was not planning to present an invoice. That wasn't what this was for. What it was for was this. I needed to see it. I needed to hold it in my hands on paper and understand what available had cost me. Because that is what I had been for 6 years. Available. Reliable. The person you call when you need something done, and the person you reschedule when something better comes up. I finished writing around midnight. Then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I poured a small glass of scotch from the bottle I keep for guests and I sat in the living room in the dark and I thought very clearly about what I wanted. Not what was fair. Not what I deserved. What I actually wanted. What I wanted was my granddaughter to know me, to grow up with me in her life as something more than an occasional visitor who dropped off gifts at the door.
I wanted to be
a grandmother the way my own grandmother had been for me, present, woven in, someone whose house smells like something familiar, and whose the voice you can still hear in your head. Decades later, what I wanted was for my son to see me, not the resource, me. I called Callum the next morning, a Saturday. I told him I wanted to meet for coffee. Just the 2 of us. He said sure, how about next week? I said today. Something in my voice, some frequency I don't normally use, made him say okay. We met at a Tim Hortons on Brant Street in Burlington because it was halfway. I was there first. I ordered a medium dark roast and I sat with my coat on, and my hands around the cup, and I waited. He came in looking confused and a little wary. The way people look when they've agreed to something they can't quite figure out. He got his own coffee and sat across from me and said, "Is everything okay? Is it, Dad? Thomas is remarried and healthy and we have a cordial relationship at this point. Nathan's doing mostly. So I just said your father's fine. This is about you and me." Callum put his coffee down. I had not rehearsed a speech. I'm a legal assistant. I know that over-rehearsed statements land wrong. They sound like arguments rather than conversations. So I just started with what was true. I told him about the birthday. Not accusingly. I told him I had ordered Shea's cake 3 weeks in advance from the bakery she'd asked for, and that I had driven to deliver it and received a text asking me not to come, and that I later found out there had been a party that afternoon. I asked him to tell me what happened. He went quiet. The quiet that isn't thinking, the quiet that is choosing. Renata's mom wanted to host this year. He said it got complicated. Callum, I said, it's been complicated for 6 years. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. I laid it out the way you lay out a client file. Chronologically, specifically, without embellishment. The birthday I arrived 40 minutes late. The trip to Collingwood I wasn't invited on. Shea's 5th birthday, when I handed a cake to Renata at the door and turned around. And this birthday? Then I told him about the mortgage. The lien. Renata's immigration paperwork. Not to threaten him, I want to be clear about that, but because I needed him to understand that available had not been a casual thing. It had been a sustained, significant, invisible thing. His face did something complicated. He's not a man who cries easily. Neither of my boys is, which is probably something I'm responsible for, honestly. But his jaw tightened and he looked away at the window for a moment. "I didn't know you felt this way," he said. "I know you didn't," I said, because I was too busy being useful to say so. I told him I wasn't there to give him an ultimatum. I wasn't there to ask him to choose between me and Renata's family. Because that's a cruel choice and I would not make it. But I told him that I needed something to change. Not a grand gesture. Something real and small and consistent. I wanted to know Shea. I wanted a standing arrangement. Not a favor, not a negotiated exception, where I was part of her life the way grandmothers are supposed to be. A Sunday dinner twice a month. A call on her birthday where I could actually hear her voice. The chance to come to her school concerts and her skating recitals, without being the person who finds out about them, after they've already happened. And I told him one more thing. I told him I was withdrawing as guarantor from his mortgage. I had spoken to a lawyer earlier that week, a colleague from the firm, someone I trusted. She'd confirmed that while it wasn't simple, and while it required Callum to refinance or find another guarantor, it was my legal right. I had held that exposure for 5 years. As was releasing it, Callum's face went white. "Mom, I need you to understand," I said, "that I have been carrying real, legal, financial risk for your family for 5 years. At the same time that I was being scheduled out of my granddaughter's birthdays. I'm not angry about that. But I am done pretending it didn't happen." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I drank about half my coffee. "What do you want me to do?" he said finally. "I told you what I want," I said. "I want to be Shea's grandmother. I want that to be a given, not a negotiation." We sat there for another hour. It wasn't easy. He pushed back on some things. He said I was being unfair to Renata, that she hadn't kept me away on purpose, that her family was just very close and it wasn't about me. I listened. I didn't argue the point because I didn't need to win an argument. I needed him to hear me. There's a difference, and it took me 53 years to understand it. When he left, he hugged me in the parking lot. Longer than he usually did. I stood there and let him, and I thought, this is the first honest conversation we have had in years. I drove home and I was shaking the whole way. My hands on the wheel were steady. I've always been good at appearing steady, but I was shaking on the inside. That's what truth costs sometimes. The steadiness is the mask. What came after was not a movie. Real life doesn't resolve in the tidy way that stories do, and I'm suspicious of any version of this kind of experience that claims it does. What happened was this. Callum talked to Renata. I know because 3 days later I received a text from her. The first direct text she had sent me in almost a year, asking if I would like to come for dinner on the following Sunday, just the four of us. Her, Callum, Shea, me. I went. Dinner was slightly tense and slightly warm. At the same time, the way dinners are when everyone is trying and nobody is quite sure of the rules yet. Renata made a chicken dish her grandmother taught her, and I told her truthfully that it was delicious. Shea showed me a project she was building out of cardboard boxes. She was making a spaceship. I sat on the kitchen floor with her for 45 minutes helping her tape the wings on straight. When I left, Shea ran after me down the front walk in her socks to give me a second hug. Callum watched from the doorway. He looked like a man who had recently understood something he wished he had understood earlier. That was 4 months ago. We've had 5 Sunday dinners since then. I've been to 1 school presentation and 1 skating test. Shea passed. She was working on her can skate level 3 badge. I was there when they announced it and I screamed embarrassingly loud, and I don't regret it for a single second. The mortgage situation is still being sorted. Callum is working with his bank to remove me as guarantor. It will take a few more months. I'm not rushing him. That was never about punishment. It was about me taking back something that had been taken quietly, the right to decide what risks I carry. Renata and I are not close. I don't think we will ever be close, not in the way I once hoped. But there is a civility between us now that feels earned rather than performed. And I will take earned civility over performed warmth any day of the week. She knows I love Callum. She knows I love Shea with everything I have. And I think she has begun to understand that a woman who will drive 40 minutes with an $87 cake and not complain when she's turned away at the door is not a woman to dismiss. I want to be honest about what I got wrong, because I think that matters just as much. I waited too long, not because I was a coward. I don't think I was, but because I had convinced myself that being patient was the same as being kind. It isn't always. Sometimes patience just postponed honesty, and the longer you postpone it, the more it costs everyone. If I had said something 4 years ago, gently, specifically to Callum directly, not as an accusation but as a need, I think we might have had those Sunday dinners already. I also underestimated what silence communicates. I thought that by never complaining, by always showing up gracefully, I was modeling something. Dignity maybe. Resilience. What I was actually modeling, I think, was that the treatment was acceptable. That you could schedule me out and I would reappear without comment. That I was not the kind of person who had requirements. I have requirements. I just forgot to mention them. My younger son Nathan, the one I was visiting in Oakville the day of the birthday text, he knew more than I realized. After I told him what had happened, he sat with it for a day and then called me back and said, "Mom, I've been watching this for 3 years and I didn't say anything either. I should have." That mattered to me. Not because I needed an ally, but because it meant I hadn't been invisible. I had just been surrounded by people who were also waiting for someone else to speak first. None of us should have been waiting. I think about what I want Shea to know someday when she's old enough to understand any of this. Not the conflict, she doesn't need that. But I want her to see, somewhere in her memory, a grandmother who didn't disappear. Who showed up even when showing up was difficult. Who made her a cardigan at 3 and a sweater at 5, and sat on a kitchen floor helping her tape wings onto a cardboard spaceship. And if she ever finds herself in a situation where she has been quietly useful for too long, to people who stopped noticing, I want her to feel somewhere in her bones that she is allowed to name it. That being reliable is not the same as being interchangeable. That you can love someone completely and still say, "This is not working, and I need it to be different." That's what I did on that Saturday morning at a Tim Hortons on Brant Street in Burlington, with a medium dark roast going cold in my hands. I need it to be different. 3 words. Not dramatic. Not a confrontation. Just the truth, finally spoken out loud. Is there someone in your life who has grown accustomed to your patience? Who has accepted your reliability so thoroughly that they've stopped asking if you're all right? If so, I want you to sit with one question before you go. What would it change, for both of you, if you simply told them the truth? Think about that. I'll see you in the next one. This is Lyra Payback, because knowing what you're worth is only the beginning.